Last night, an incident took place in Gaza that resulted in the tragic death of World Central Kitchen employees.
It's basically impossible for the IDF to spin in any way that makes them look good. There's no way. At best, it's a horrible, horrible failure. What you are more likely to see than some kind of like top-down extermination of Palestinians all the way from the war cabinet down to the soldiers is people being so off by October 7th that there's going to be some kind of culture among the IDF, amongst people on the ground, that they can basically just take matters into their own hands and do what they want without repercussions. There is a ticking clock on how long the world is going to support Israel, on how long it's going to take them to see the civilian death toll or the death toll in Gaza to go up before they start to turn their backs. Usually when there is news about an atrocity in the Gaza war, there's usually like a little bit of ambiguity. There's a bit of contradictory statements between the Palestinian side, the Israeli side. The IDF will say one thing, the witnesses on the ground might say another thing, Hamas might say another thing. Their evidence might not always be as clear. There's like blurry footage, or especially with the Al Ali hospital, you've got like 5 or 6 different open source intelligence accounts arguing over whether or not it was an Iron Dome interception, or if it was a misfired PIJ rocket, or if it was the IDF just bombing the car park of a hospital because they wanted to kill people who were taking shelter. This particular story does not really have that much ambiguity at all. There's already quite a few things that we know for sure happened. So it was about 11 o'clock at night, between 11 and midnight, when 3 vehicles from World Central Kitchen, an aid organization, left their depot onto this road along kind of like central Gaza, and they were struck most likely by an Israeli drone. I think it was a drone, yeah. And first vehicle was hit, and then the people who were in that vehicle who survived got out, went into the second vehicle. That vehicle got hit, and then people went into the third vehicle, and the third vehicle that was coming in to go back to catch the other people who had been injured also got struck. So there are 3 vehicles all smashed up. 7 people died. 3 of them were British aid workers. 1 was a US-Canadian dual citizen. There was a Polish person killed, and there was a Palestinian killed. So and an Australian. So quite a few aid workers were killed. There is no ambiguity as to who did the strike. Israel have owned up to it. Netanyahu has said that it was an IDF strike that hit those 3 vehicles. As far as what happened before they were struck, things get tiny bit murky. There's one suggestion that there was someone before this strike was seen with a gun on top of a big vehicle before these 3 vehicles left their depot. But other than that, there's not really that much outside of that. We do know that this path was agreed upon between the aid organization and the IDF for them to move. We know that they were collecting aid and distributing it from that pier that had been established between Cyprus and Gaza that went up just last month. Otherwise, very, very little explanation that lets the IDF off the hook here. So far, the IDF have given a initial statement. They've said that there was a misidentification at night. That's from their initial findings. They've said that it was the communication between the aid convoy and the IDF wasn't as strong as it should have been. They've established a new center to apparently say that they want to improve that communication. But they're giving it to an independent body to investigate thoroughly, and they say that their findings are going to be out only within a few days. So they've given their word. We should expect a full investigation and its results within a few days. But there are a few more damning interpretations. Actually, interestingly, not from Al Jazeera, but from Haaretz. They've said that according to one of their sources who works in the intelligence branch from the IDF Southern Command, has said that this was not a lack of coordination. He has said that it is because of poor discipline among field commanders. They've come out with a pretty damning testimony that is arguing what's happening in Gaza right now, especially with the IDF Southern Command, is that they are kind of just doing as they please. That these commanders are breaking IDF and Defense Ministry protocols, that they are ignoring regulations, that they're disobeying orders, and just kind of enjoying free reign, basically. Whether or not that gets verified by any other sources, because right now it's one anonymous person who supposedly works in the intelligence branch. But whether that amounts to anything, we don't know. If it turns out to be true, I don't know if it would surprise me. But yeah, I guess we're just going to have to see exactly what it was. That's the kind of two alternative stories at the moment. The most frequent one that's coming from the IDF is that it was a poor communication, but there is this one dissenting person who's gone to Haaretz and is saying that it's actually because commanders are just operating slightly rogue, and also the idea that it was miscalculation. It seems to be that as far as all the different news organizations go, there is very little dispute, very few disputed statements. I think the one that I saw was from the New York Times. Yeah, they were saying it's unclear what sort of munitions struck the cars, but I think now, at least according to Haaretz and a few other people, even Times of Israel, it seems now that we know that it was probably a Hermes 450 UAV, which is a drone. And if it was this, what does that mean? It means that it's pretty high tech. I think this is basically marketed as the most versatile and reliable unmanned aircraft platform in the world. Apparently it's record breaking. I don't know what record it broke, but we also know that the way it works, a little bit about how it works, is that it has what's called flyby camera mode, which means that once they have a particular target, like the payload, they can slave the air vehicle to it, which means the air vehicle will lock on to a particular target. And that means that the operator can observe clearly without having to focus on moving the thing in the right direction as well, without losing their target, which basically means that they've got very, it even says here, optimal observation. Now, does that mean that they saw the labels on top of the aid trucks, that says World Kitchen, whatever was it, World Central Kitchen? But the fact that it happened at 11 o'clock at night or midnight, it seems to be that the cameras on these drones are not particularly good. But again, I don't really know if they could have been fitted with night vision or could have had some kind of enhancement. That's something that will hopefully come out in the investigation as well. But we do know that it wasn't cheap equipment. This was like a pretty expensive, high-tech piece of equipment that was used to do these strikes. But that's really the only dispute. It seems like Al Jazeera agrees on the facts, more or less. The BBC agrees on the facts. The Reuters, everyone seems to agree so far on the facts. It's like a very unambiguous one. Blinken was asked whether or not this gave the US pause after they just approved $2.5 billion in military aid to Israel. He responded by saying that the United States will still have a long-standing commitment to Israel's security, so it doesn't look like this is going to influence America's decisions so far on supporting Israel. Bernie Sanders and a few other left-leaning Democrats have said that this was not an accident and that it was, and they're arguing that there should be no more aid given to Netanyahu's war machine. So that's another idea as well. Another floated version of the story is that the IDF knew where these aid workers were going. They knew that they were going to be on that road, but they decided to hit them anyway because they don't want Palestinians to get aid. That's also one narrative that's been offered. We'll see if the investigation can disprove that or not. And it's not for every event that Israel offers to do a independent professional expert investigation, to have that available within so little time. So they seem to be taking it seriously, most likely because foreign nationals were killed, like quite a few of them. So This organization, by the way, the World Central Kitchen, they were also distributing aid to Israelis on October 7th. So they've had a relationship with Israel for quite a while. They, according to their own website, they've served more than 42 million meals in Gaza over the last 175 days. This was obviously last month they made this statement. And they were also involved in the first shipment of aid to Gaza through the sea corridor, the one from Cyprus into Gaza. The chief executive of the organization has stopped operating in Gaza, which is quite worrying. Them and I think one other organization I was able to find have decided to pause or stop their operations in Gaza. Some of them have said they're going to come back when the situation improves or once communications are enhanced, but others, they might be done with them, unfortunately. The chief executive here said that Israel was using food as a weapon of war and has described this as an attack, like a targeted attack on humanitarian organizations. So that is quite worrying for the situation in North Gaza when a few of these fairly indispensable organizations have decided to just opt out, and whether or not they can be replaced in time, don't know. But there it is. We know that 3 aid vehicles were hit by Israeli strikes at around 11 o'clock at night or midnight in very quick succession. We know that they were going on a road that was agreed between the organization and the IDF. We know that Israel did it, and I guess the next step is to find out why. You kind of missed the point in Ryan Macbeth's video about the imagery in the drone. Since it was a night, he only focused on the IR, night vision view, that loses color detail and would not be able. No, yeah, he was saying that the cameras on the drone would not show you something like that label on the top of the car. But I don't know if for a drone you can change the camera. I don't know if you can do that, or if all those drones always use those cameras. If they do always use those cameras that were shown in his video, then that means that they would never have seen this. But then that would also lead you to wonder, if they knew that there were aid vehicles on that road, what happened that they weren't able to check whether or not they were hitting those humanitarian vehicles as opposed to, I guess, what they thought was a military target? I don't know. It was 11 p.m. at night. I assume they were using night vision. Yeah, they would have been, but I don't know if you've seen a sample of the night vision cameras that come with these drones. They're not particularly good. They wouldn't be good enough to spot this, or it's debatable whether they would be. So, yeah, who knows? Vosh already has a segment up against about the bombing, about the strike. Vosh.
The World Central Kitchen is...
You know what would make a really good Corey Gil-Schuster video, that guy who interviews people in Palestine and Israel, is ask Israelis and Palestinians both if they think the international media has their side, because all of them will say no. Palestinians don't feel very well represented by, even if you say Western media, Palestinians definitely don't feel like the Western media has their side, but Israelis don't think so either.
Pausing its Gaza operations after 7 of its workers were killed in an airstrike, leaving even fewer options for Palestinians.
I think the answers to that question from both sides would be really, really interesting to know.
Of famine. They had just finished unloading 100 tons of food at a warehouse in central Gaza when the group says their cars were hit by an Israeli strike.
For that. Nothing I can do.
Here's what the Israeli Prime Minister had to say.
Wait.
Unfortunately, in the last day, there was a tragic incident where our forces unintentionally struck innocent people in the Gaza Strip. It happens in war, and we are thoroughly investigating it. We are in contact with the governments, and we'll do everything.
Man, I don't want to do like...
He does them by request. No, I'm going to do it the Sigma way and just ask them myself. That's the idea. Okay, chill.
Expression policing or whatever, but it sure does look like he's smirking. God damn. He sure isn't contorting his face in a way to make me think he isn't.
Appearances in the future.
Well, World Central Kitchen has been feeding starving residents of Gaza since the start of the Israel-Hamas war. CNN's Melissa Bell is in Jerusalem. Melissa, devastating news for World Central Kitchen aid workers. What more do we know about the strike, and importantly, also the messaging from Israel right now? What we've heard is that they were in touch with the IDF, they knew the route, but clearly something went wrong, and right now we just don't know what.
That's right. In fact, we've just been hearing...
I mean, this isn't something going wrong. This is just a continuation of their behavior this entire time, you know? Like, literally the only reason we're even hearing about this is because they're foreigners. They're not Palestinians. There have been so many instances of... how many Palestinian journalists just got murked in their family homes near the beginning of the invasion of the Gaza Strip? Like, again, the only reason there's been any, plausible deniability is because they've been killing off the people who could report on it, and the people reporting on it, in a lot of cases, have been Arab. It's really, really, really straightforward.
From the IDF, Eleni, saying that
Well, I guess we got the conclusions roaming in. I imagine the thing is that if people ever start using this Haaretz article against the IDF side of the story, which again you probably could, there'd be nothing wrong with that because it's apparently a source from the intelligence branch, but what this person seems to be saying is the complete opposite, is that they're saying that the IDF does have rules and regulations and the defense ministry has rules and regulations, but what's happening on the ground is that people, the Southern Command and people are not obeying those regulations, that they're just kind of using free reign, which would actually go against the idea that there's been some kind of top-down initiative to kill aid workers so that the Palestinians don't get any aid. But it's not going to surprise me, maybe there's a little prediction, is people who are saying that Israel has a top-down initiative to kill Palestinians, civilians, to the point that they will actually also target aid workers to stop the Palestinians getting aid. If they're going to hold that position at the same time as this position here, I have a feeling that some people will do that because even though they're contradictory, they both are Israel bad, right? Yeah. That really wouldn't surprise me. But if this is the case, I feel like this is a far less extreme and a far more plausible thing, though, right? And I said this as well, is what you are more likely to see than some kind of top-down extermination of fucking Palestinians all the way from the war cabinet down to the soldiers is people being so fucked off by October 7th that there's going to be some kind of culture among the IDF, amongst people on the ground, that they can basically just take matters into their own hands and do what they want without repercussions. I would say that's more likely than the former top-down final solution shit, right? But you could actually have a discussion about that. Are there enough checks and balances in place to make sure that what this one source is claiming doesn't happen? Is it the case that the IDF Southern Command is out there just doing as they please? And that's why this person's saying the strike happened. Not because of lack of coordination, but because field commanders are poorly disciplined and they're just doing whatever the fuck they want. I feel like you could actually have a really valuable discussion around that one, and that would actually warrant investigation in and of itself if it's backed up by enough evidence. But I guess that's maybe not on the cards here. Oh, well, whatever. From a historical perspective, I think what just happened in the last week, it'll really inform just all the different motions at play that are influencing people's decisions, like the role that the United States is playing, the role that international pressure is playing, the role that Hamas is playing. Yeah, I think it tells you quite a lot. Yeah. So about, I think 5 days ago, a group of aid workers from the World Central Kitchen, which is an aid organization run by a celebrity chef, left their depot at about 11 p.m. They went down this road, which had been pre-approved in central southern Gaza. They were going down this road, which had been pre-approved as an aid route between the IDF and the aid workers. But on this road, in the dead of night. They were hit by an Israeli drone strike directly. The people got out of the first damaged car, went into the second one. The second car was struck, and then a third car, which was ahead of them, turned back to try and get the people who were injured and save them. And then that car was also struck. 7 people died, international aid workers. 3 of them were British. 1, I think, was a Canadian. Yeah, so pretty horrible tragedy. And I think the reason that this story became such a pivotal one is that unlike previous stories like the Al Ali Hospital strike, this one is completely unambiguous. It was not an accident. Those 3 vehicles were struck in very quick succession by a drone that is a very high-tech drone. I think probably one of the, at least it sells itself as the best one for this kind of job, to the point that it even has like a flyby camera mode where it will lock onto a target automatically so that the operator can have like optimal observation rights. They can just look at the camera without worrying about following the target perfectly. So it's pretty well designed. It was very deliberate. It was a very precise strike, which means it had approval from several relevant stages at the chain of command. The question, however, was why did they hit it? Why did they hit 3 aid vehicles? The initial claim that came from the IDF was that it was a misidentification, that they'd misidentified a gunman. And then that led to a few potential conclusions. That one was potentially that they just misidentified the whole convoy altogether. They just thought that this was like a convoy that was being used by gunmen. But the other interpretation could have been that, and this was one that I was maybe thinking, because this would have been really bad, was that they thought 1 or 2 gunmen in an aid convoy would pass the proportionality test. That they actually thought that 7 international aid workers who were delivering much needed aid to the north of Gaza was actually worth it because there were 2 gunmen there, which would have been absolutely insane. That would have been a criminal calculation. But more information came out, at least from the IDF side. They've given a slightly different, not massively different actually, it's just an expanded finding, which is that they blamed it on a misidentification, stating that they did not actually believe the vehicles were aid vehicles at all. They thought that they were different vehicles because they had apparently been following 2 gunmen and had apparently traced their movements to these 3 vehicles. So I guess at some point they might have gone off of the grid and then reappeared, and then they probably thought that that's what they'd found. They described it as a grave mistake. They blamed it on mistaken identification, errors in decision-making, but they also said that it was contrary to standard operating procedures. So I'm guessing that means, if you believe them, it's kind of like, it's almost like 2 things at once. There's one, identifying a group of combatants with limited intelligence, but then at the same time, it's also like identifying what you think are militants, but not having an appropriate procedure or not following a procedure that is actually there to double check whether or not you actually have the right target. And then the other issue that they blamed it on is that there wasn't enough communication between them and the workers. So at one point, they did know that this was a safe route for aid workers. They knew that aid workers were in the area, but I guess they didn't have communication direct enough that they knew what time the aid workers would be there and that they didn't have any live contact. And they also targeted these vehicles at night, which meant that because if you've ever seen drone night vision, especially from this particular drone, which you can find online, you would not have been able to read the sign. It's very unlikely you'd have been able to read the signs on top of the vehicles. So one suggestion is that they're talking about using thermal stickers now, but it does highlight a few issues. It means that communication between the aid workers and the IDF was actually very weak, because on the day of the strike happening, they already opened a new organization dedicated to improving communications, which is like, you'd think if you're in an area which is considered agreed between aid workers and the IDF, but you're still willing to strike targets in there, I don't know why you wouldn't want to have like an enhanced communication project already there, like a communication apparatus. So that is a pretty strong suggestion that even on the IDF's terms, they are just not putting enough measures in place to allow aid workers as safe passage as they can give them. The fact that they needed an atrocity like this to happen to introduce these new measures. And that's a really big problem, especially given that I think this World Central Kitchen, who have ceased operations in Gaza for now, as well as other organizations, is these organizations that are no longer operating in Gaza were supposed to be filling the gap that was left by UNRWA, because UNRWA got defunded by a bunch of international agencies. So they have said that they fired 2 people. They dismissed 2 people. I think they reprimanded 3 more. But this event it's basically impossible for the IDF to spin in any way that makes them look good. There's no way. It just looks like, at best, it's a horrible, horrible failure of communication, as well as just bad eggs, I guess, is their narrative. But the worst interpretation is that they just haven't been pursuing their military operation with the level of care that they should have been, given that they've already changed a few things. It's gotten them into a lot of trouble internationally, especially from the United States. The United States, pretty much after this, gave an ultimatum to Israel, saying that if they don't act immediately to protect Palestinian civilians, they would face potential changes in American policy, which is pretty big. As far as this phone call between Biden and Netanyahu went, it's probably the biggest standoff between an American president and an Israeli prime minister, probably since Bush Sr. in 91, 92, which was when they threatened to withhold American loans in exchange for a settlement freeze. Something like $10 billion worth of loans. So there's a pretty big shift. I think Biden also used the words immediate ceasefire. And very, very shortly after this phone call from Biden to Netanyahu announced that he was going to open the Erez crossing, which is a crossing just up here, which was damaged in October 7th, and another crossing up at the top, another port is going to be opened in Ashdod. So basically, there's going to be a port that's going to allow a bunch of aid coming in through the Mediterranean, and then it's going to go down the road to Erez, and Erez is only about 15 minutes away from Gaza City. Because the problem before now has been that the only crossings were down in Rafah and in Kerem Shalom, which meant that aid that came in here would have to go all the way up through here, and that's why, especially where there's a complete collapse of any kind of law and order or security, then a lot of aid workers just didn't want to go there. So distribution was like basically unfeasible. The port from the Mediterranean that the United States is involved in from Cyprus is about here, but this extra one should hopefully make a pretty big difference because the situation in northern Gaza is so dire. And I think this does show you that as unfortunate, as horrible as it is, and it really shouldn't be the case, is that so many like military decisions, and this is not just the case now, this has been the case as long as Israel's existed, is military decisions don't just depend on what the government wants or what the government considers to be the most humane, or definitely not to do with what's optimum for protecting civilians. Because what also influences their decisions actually is how it plays on the world stage. That's a consideration. I've heard Ben Shapiro say once when he was talking about going into Rafah, his justification for wanting to go in there quickly was that he literally said that there is a ticking clock on how long the world is going to support Israel, on how long it's going to take them to see the civilian death toll or the death toll in Gaza to go up before they start to turn their backs. And that's why Israel needs to move quickly. And it's like, if you're actually making a military decision based on that, like if Rafah is so full of people, but without taking necessary precautions, you would want to go in anyway, because if you go, even if you're more careful and you take longer, then the world will actually look on you worse in that second option. That the world will actually look on you in a worse way if you take longer to do it more carefully than if you do it quickly and without care. That is pretty fucked up, I think, that some people might consider that. But after this US response and after this response from the international community, Israel have very suddenly, as in just today, announced that they were going to withdraw all but one battalion from southern Gaza. They have one brigade remaining, sort of between the north and the south, which is basically securing a corridor, which keeps the enclave split, and that also means that people can't go all the way back up from the south to the north, but it will mean that people in Rafah are going to be able to go into Khan Yunis again. I think that's the idea. And what they seem to be focusing on now for the foreseeable future is that they're going to focus on intelligence-based raids, specific raids in northern and central Gaza. That's the next thing they're going to do. And apparently they're also going to be securing aid corridors from the middle up to the north, which they hadn't had before. So why they've done this? Well, they've said that they've achieved their goals in Khan Yunis. They said that the local Hamas brigade is dismantled. They've said that they've killed thousands of combatants. They said they've killed 30 kilometers worth of tunnels. It could be something that they were just going to do anyway, because the reservists in Khan Yunis have been there for 4 months and they need time to recuperate. But according to the IDF now, Hamas have 24 battalions total from October 7th. 18 of them are dismantled. 4 remain in Rafah and 2 are in the center of the Strip. So it looks like their focus now is intelligence-based raids in the center of the Strip. Which means, impressively, they have they've actually adopted the Jenk strategy. We're about to see what the Jenk strategy looks like. They've decided to pull back the bulk of their forces, and they're going to focus on special forces raids. That's when an intelligence-based precise raid to attack people and to possibly maybe even rescue hostages. That's special forces. So I don't know. Are we going to see more of these? Like this is, by the way, what special forces do in places like the West Bank. This is how they capture suspects. Is they typically disguise themselves as Arabs and just ruffle people up in the street. Like, it's all very chaotic, Israeli special forces. Obviously, the raids in Gaza will be a bit more organized than this. I don't think they're actually going to go into Rafah or Khan Yunis disguised as customers at the fucking shawarma stand, but yeah, I guess we'll see, you know? Maybe they're going to send this guy in from Fauda, from the series. This fucking baldy chunker. This immovable unit. This has been him from October 7th until now, and what's going to happen in a few seconds is these guys are going to let go. This is actually live footage of the leading guy. As for what happens to the hostages, I have no idea. Looks like Egypt is going to host the next round of talks. Both Israel and Hamas are sending delegations. Otherwise, yeah, it looks like international pressure is having an impact. I mean, the Israelis have said that they've done everything they need to do in Khan Yunis, and this isn't incompatible with them planning to take Rafah later on. There is some conjecture that they might be doing what they're doing now to allow people to leave Rafah to go back into Khan Yunis so that they can go back and so that they can go to Rafah when there are less people there. Or it might be that they're quite confident in what they did at the Shifa hospital when they said that Hamas had regrouped there. They went in there, raided the place, and just killed and kidnapped like a few hundred people. They probably think that they can do the same in Khan Yunis. That's one suggestion that's been offered. But yeah, it looks for now that there's been a at least temporary withdrawal from the south, and hopefully some much needed relief is going to be eased into the north. But who knows? Hamas have declared that it was a victory because they see it as a withdrawal, but you know. Apparently there's also a Wikipedia war over this. Hang on. Apparently in Wikipedia there has been, isn't there a table where's the table actually of all the different events? Is it here? Does anyone have it? The Wikipedia war on Gaza. It'll be in my history somewhere. 1 second. Wiki. Oh, it's list of engagements. Okay. Yeah, here. They've marked a few Palestinian victories, Hamas victories. And I think the footnotes for some of these is that the IDF has withdrawn from Gaza today. And this is the siege of Khan Yunis. So apparently Palestinians have won in Khan Yunis, where the IDF are saying that they are leaving partially because they've dismantled the local Hamas brigade. So yeah, there's actually like a wiki fight going on over disputed, discuss. Fuck me, man. What an absolute state. You know what might be the case is that if this withdrawal holds out and Hamas, well, we know that for one, I think a few hours after Israel pulled out of Khan Yunis, I think like 5 rockets got fired from the city. So there's still activity in there, but whether or not that counts as like a functioning brigade or not is obviously very different. It makes me wonder if this might be a bit similar to what was played out in the Lebanese civil war. Probably not, but when Israel wanted to invade Lebanon in 82, they really, really wanted to go in, but they were not really being given a legitimate casus belli to do so. So even when it was more or less green lit by the Reagan administration, it was really only a yellow light based on a few expectations that were never actually fulfilled. So in the build up to the 82 war, to the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, there were a few attacks that were carried out against Israeli figures internationally, but the ceasefire that was agreed was over the border. It was a ceasefire over the Lebanon-Israel border. So it didn't count when Palestinian militants killed an Israeli person, say, like on the Jordanian border or in Europe. So there were a few times when the state of Israel tried to use those excuses, but it wouldn't fly. There was even one time when they launched a retaliatory raid, just like an airstrike in the south of Lebanon, which is not really like a more of a tit for tat thing than actually like a ceasefire break. But they hit the PLO, and then the PLO were trying to uphold the ceasefire. It seemed to be that they actually were quite studious towards it. But there was one strike from the IDF that was quite bad. So the PLO responded by firing off a rocket barrage. But because they were still trying to avoid an Israeli invasion, they actually deliberately instructed the people with the rockets to miss. They actually just fired them into a bunch of fields, and nothing was damaged. So there was this really, really tense game being played between the PLO and Israel for quite a while before the invasion. But what Israel did eventually was when Abu Nidal, a splinter group that actually opposed the PLO, targeted the Israeli ambassador in London. They shot him. And then that was what Israel used to go into Lebanon, even though the PLO condemned the attack. They didn't have anything to do with it, but they also condemned it. And the PLO did not condemn that many terror attacks at that time. So it's making me wonder now if the IDF are considering international opinion, whether or not they might actually just be waiting for Hamas to regroup and just try something on again. Because I think if Hamas even manages just something, like if they if they murder a couple of hostages, or if they regroup in a particular part of Gaza and the IDF can actually just show it very clearly, then that'll give them the reason to go back in. It could also be the case that they're pulling back reservists because they're expecting an escalation with Hezbollah. That could be a thing as well. But yeah, I think the last 5 days have been pretty illuminating, because I think it tells you a little bit about, potentially quite a bit about IDF operations and how they're and their shortcomings when it came to securing aid routes for humanitarian workers. It tells you about their souring relationship with the United States. It tells you probably about how they will not so subtly respond to international pressure in very clear ways. Like, they're saying that they opened the Rafah crossing and the Ashdod cross and the Ashdod port because they were going to anyway. But it just very conveniently happened a few hours after Biden gave probably the angriest phone call or the angriest communication from an American president to an Israeli prime minister since the 90s. So yeah, it's just not very subtle, if that's the kind of message they were trying to put out, that they were going to do these things for different reasons. Israeli channels are saying the withdrawal is an anticipation of a Rafah offensive. It could be, yeah. It could be, because to go into Rafah, they were going to need to pull up new reservists anyway. They weren't going to take people who have been in Khan Yunis for 4 months and then be like, all right, next stage Rafah. That's not how it works, no. They were going to they would have had to pull up new people to do it anyway. And it is possible now that the IDF leaving Khan Yunis gives people in Rafah the opportunity to go there instead. They're not going to give up on Rafah, especially if they think they've got, because according to the Israelis, they have 24 Hamas battalions and 18 of them have been dismantled. They're not going to leave just 6 Hamas battalions in Gaza and just leave and secure the border again. They're not going. They're never going to do that. I think even with no one in the world supporting them, I don't think they would give up on that goal. Hold on, saying it's not an accident is very misleading. It's clear an accident like friendly fire. I mean not an accident, sorry, with the aid workers. I obviously mean not an accident as in they wanted to hit those vehicles. Not that they knew those were humanitarian aid vehicles. I don't think they knew they were humanitarian aid vehicles. I think their version of the story, which still doesn't make them look good, is believable. I think it's more believable that they thought they were hitting a militant convoy. That doesn't make it okay, though, obviously, because there's still a failure enough that people got dismissed and all that shit. But yeah, I don't mean it wasn't an accident in the sense that they knew they were targeting aid vehicles. If people want to have that discussion, I've said this already. If people want to commit to the idea that Israel first of all, Israel allowed this passage for aid workers, then told the aid workers to go on this passage, knew the aid workers would be here at 11, knew they were international aid workers, decided to strike them anyway because that was their entire goal, which was to kill aid workers because it's worth all the international condemnation and all the bad fucking blowback for this, because at least 3 aid vehicles wouldn't reach the north of Gaza, which they want to starve. If you think if that's your number one explanation for what happened, given the evidence, I don't want you in my community. You're a waste of space. You're contributing nothing. You're not curious. You don't care about evidence. You're a asshole. Fuck off. That's basically that's kind of where I am on that position. Okay. You can go and watch the 20 million other commentators who have made that conclusion with just as little evidence as you have. So yeah, okay. Well, that's where we are. Pretty eventful few days. Dwight Baldwin with a $4.99. I really appreciate that. Maybe Israel pulling back until Iran does their planned retaliation. I can't predict anything. No one can, but if Iran does do a planned retaliation, I think it'll be a tit for tat. I don't think Iran has any interest in going to a full-scale war with Israel, but that's just my guess. I think there's kind of like an unspoken rule book that gets followed between these larger forces, which is that you don't do nothing because you need to convince your people that you're doing something. You need to make it look like you're fighting the fight, but you also want to not do enough. You also want to not do so much that the enemy thinks you're willing to escalate into a full war. So I think you're willing to do enough to let your people know that you're fighting, but you're also willing to restrain enough to tell the other side that you understand the game that's going on, that you understand that escalation is not what we want, which I think is basically what Hezbollah and Israel have been doing. Pope John Ball is actually 6 Canadian 99. I appreciate that. Autocorrect ducked me, lol. I meant to say they are used to people going along with their excuses to murk whomever. I don't know what you mean by that. I don't think Actually, I don't think that's true at all. People do not typically go along with Israel's excuses. Israel's excuses get ridiculed to the fucking ends of the earth by everyone. Biden didn't buy their excuse. I mean, he might have bought it, but he still said that because of the way the rest of the world took it, the voters, etc., Biden got really, really mad at the IDF for it. Because if you take the IDF's version of the story, two things happened. One is that it was a bad apple failure because they didn't do enough to check whether or not they had misidentified something, especially on a safe route. So that would be a bad apple thing because they're saying that their procedures weren't followed. But the other side of their story, the other half of their story, which is not incompatible, is that there was also a systemic failure because there was a systemic failure in that the humanitarian aid orgs and the IDF did not have an appropriate level of communication for doing what they were trying to do, especially in the middle of the night. Do you think the IDF knew there was a good chance the convoy had aid workers in them? Not based on anything they've said. If they did, that would be absolutely insane. Because if the convoy even had aid workers on it, but it also had armed people, that would still not be a good enough reason to hit it. I don't think that the proportionality calculus on that would be outrageous, especially for an aid vehicle, right? Because when you think of an aid vehicle, it's not just the 7 civilians who are in the aid vehicles, it's also the unspecified number of people who need that aid who are affected. That's really, yeah, that would be insane.
Fair point, it just wouldn't have made this much of an impact if it was all Palestinians. They would have simply claimed they were all Hamas, and with no one to verify, we would agree with them.
Thanks for the $13.99. I really appreciate that. Yeah, that's probably true. If you look at what was done to, because this became a huge story because it was international aid workers. If it had been 7 Palestinians, would we know? Would that news have ever gone anywhere? Like, probably not. Yeah, that's a really big problem. It's really worrying as well. Anyway. Damning, one might say. First, the drone unit said it saw Hamas terrorists climb onto one of the trucks and fire into the air. Way of sending signals regarding positions. Action point 3, the convoy split up. Point 4, the convoy entered a hangar, which obscured which vehicles might be going in and out. This is more or less what I was saying. I don't know what. So they saw trucks of armed people entering a hangar, but then the people who came out were aid workers, and they thought they were hitting the armed people who went in. Again, that shows you the failure of communication. There's 2 hangars. Oh. There's actually quite a bit more here. First 4 action points. The IDF drone unit refrained from attacking the aid trucks because they questioned their commanders and were ordered by Division 162 not to, despite suspicion of Hamas terrorists being involved. IDF tried to call aid workers, was unable to reach them. Okay. The IDF tried to call the aid workers involved in the field, was unable to reach them. WCK headquarters tried to call the aid workers, did not answer. When they left the hangar, the drone unit believed that these were not the same vehicles that they thought were the Hamas vehicles, or that around 4 operatives had joined or taken over the convoy. Mistaken identity issue could not lead to criminal charges. Well, yeah, because negligence is a bit different from recklessness or intent to harm. They believed the order not to attack no longer applied. Oh, there's a lot more detail here. When did this one come out? Oh, today. The IDF dismissed 2 senior IDF officers and censored 3 others. Okay, we know that. 7 different action points in the incident. The drone unit saw multiple suspicious actions starting after 10 p.m. Monday. First, the drone unit said it saw Hamas terrorists climb onto one of the trucks and fire in the air at what it called Action Point 2. According to the IDF, this tactic is frequent and is used by Hamas to send signals to other Hamas fighters in the area regarding his position. The fuck is this, dude? Okay. At point 3, the convoy split up. Action 4, the convoy entered a hangar which obscured which vehicles might be going in and out and who might be in the vehicles compared to who was in the vehicles before entering the hangar. It's almost like if you take out telecom services, it's hard to call people. If they're calling and they don't answer, that's not a telecom thing. Like, okay, whatever. I don't think they're saying the line was dead. In the first 4 action points, the drone unit refrained from attacking the aid trucks because they questioned their commanders and were ordered not to, despite suspicion of Hamas terrorists being involved. Tried to call aid workers, unable to reach them. So we've already done this bit. When vehicles left the hangar, the IDF drone unit believed that these were not the same vehicles and thought that these were Hamas vehicles or that around 4 operatives had joined or taken over the convoy. Okay? According to the IDF, attacking the trucks after all of this was a mistaken identity issue. The drone unit believed the order didn't apply. Had the right to engage the trucks. Oh, so they did it just assuming they had the green light. Jesse, how are you reading this saying so they knew it was aid workers? What the fuck are you talking about? This story is giving you the complete opposite. How can you read something and just draw the complete opposite conclusion from it? That's so weird. The drone unit had thermal imaging that did not see the WCK worker sign posted on the roof of the trucks. Let me double check. You're saying there were 2 hangars, but here they're saying entered a hangar. It sounds like they're saying there was a hangar, which meant that they didn't know, which they saw suspects going into a hangar, but this is the same hangar that the aid workers came out of. So they didn't know who was going into the hangar and who was coming out. Because it seems to me that the aid workers came out of the hangar that they apparently saw suspects going into. Oh yeah, here are the action points. Convoy splits. Yeah, so they go into, so wait, this one here goes into, yeah, so they go into hangar A. The suspects go into hangar A, but then one vehicle leaves hangar A and goes to hangar B. So basically they see armed suspect on this convoy with additional vehicles. They go into hangar A, and then coming out of hangar A later on are the aid workers who go onto this road. But then another single vehicle goes to hangar B at around the same time, or a bit earlier. So basically, they're following. So it sounds like they're seeing Hangar A, and they see people coming out of Hangar A who apparently went in who were suspects. So they see suspects entering Hangar A, and then they target people who came out of Hangar A, which suggests that they misidentified. I don't even know. Did they? So would this convoy here that they saw first? Did this convoy here have anything to do with the aid workers? Were these the same trucks, or because they went through the welcome center, and additional vehicles joined? So maybe they thought Hamas was hiding amongst the convoy workers, which I wonder if they could. Because if you're an aid worker, and Hamas people just kind of like join you, just come next to you for safety, to keep themselves safe, like, you wouldn't stop them, would you? Unless they kill you. But I don't know if that's exactly how it works. Based on a false understanding that they had Hamas in them. Is that what they say? I don't know if that's what they say, though. Scarlett, did they say that they thought they were targeting an aid convoy that just had Hamas in them, so they knew they were hitting aid workers, but also Hamas? Is that what they're saying? I don't think they were saying that. Why would they say that they couldn't read the fucking signs? The official statement released yesterday. I thought I saw the statement from today where they said that they didn't know. Strike conducted with no awareness that these were WCK vehicles. That's what Hagari said in his statement. So unless they've updated it, they knew it was aid going into the hangar but not coming out. They're not saying they knew it was WCK vehicles while attacking. Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought they didn't know that they were hitting WCK vehicles. I thought they believed they were hitting Hamas vehicles. Yeah. That's why I don't think they haven't claimed to be doing this based on proportionality. They haven't claimed that. At the very start, did they know there were 8 trucks? I don't know. Because it looks like they're saying that they saw suspicious activity at the start, which would suggest that they don't think they were looking at 8 trucks. So action point 1, as the convoy goes south from the pier, they said that they saw suspicious actions, a Hamas terrorist climbing onto one of the trucks and firing in the air, which looks like what Hamas does to get other people to join them, basically, to let people know where they are. And then there's the split where they follow the wrong people or some shit. Or even where they follow the right people, but they follow them into a hangar, so they don't know who's out. Anyway.